Welcome to Talking in Stations. I'm Matterall with my friend Caleb. How you doing, Caleb? Can you hear me? Caleb?
Oh, I hear you.
Oh,
I'm not sure.
wrong window that was active. I don't know when it. Why it does that? Sometimes it doesn't activate.
Well, say hello, Caleb.
Hello, Caleb, and everyone else in here.
Nice. Also with us we have Nick. How you doing, Nick?
Yeah, it's a good day. Just finally getting a little catch up on what's happening in Eve.
That's right. And you all know Nick because we just interviewed him a few days ago. He's one of our Patreons, but also a longtime player and did all kinds of different things before that. So he knows about all kinds of different things. All right, let's have a look at some of the news. We'll talk about, I think, big thing in the war today was the fight over Fortizar and Curse in OSHT, or 0SHT. And that is the staging Fortizar for the initiative. It just got reinforced through armor into hull. So the next timer will be win or die for that Fortizar. So we'll check that out. Also, there's a few other posts in Reddit. Looks like Asher wrote a post about some of the skirmishing he's been doing lately. And then there's a lot of iHubs actually going up on the timer. So we'll take a look at the timer board. And other than that, slow news day. All right, so we'll turn on the screen here. And I believe it's this one. There you go. All right. So the Pappy forces, I looked and it was a lot of them decided to go over to, we call this Oshit, but it's 0, not O. And I can't change it there. They went to reinforce a Fortizar for the troublemaking initiative who were in the area. Let's look at Dotland and go to the area. This is, again, it's in Curse, but it really borders on Catch. So we'll start there. And as you can see, Oshit's right here in the middle. I'm just going to call it Oshit. And the initiative had a lot of this reinforced yesterday. There was a whole ton of things that were reinforced. I don't know how much of that was turned. It looks like the Watchmen still have a ton of the stuff that they had before. But it may be that either they took it back or they are abandoning it anyway, since they're kind of splitting up and going their own ways. Part of that alliance is moving into test, and the remainder of the alliance is making a decision on where they will go. They may stay put and join Brave. They may stay put and join other groups in the area. But with the intention that Test has to move all of Legacy over to Delve and Period Basis and Quarius, it may behoove them to be closer to Test in order to be protected better in the future. However, Test also said they wanted to take all that territory away from Goonswarm and the Imperium and keep the territory that they already have. But they don't know how they're going to do that yet. So that was the pretext of what's going on. The initiative again, landing right here in Oshit and duking it out. Take a look now at the system. This is in Curse, and you can see there was a big spike in fighting a few hours ago. It got over 1,500. I believe local got up to 1,870. That's what we heard. Let's take a look at the lost mails. And then we'll have a look at some actual video footage. Yep, so here it is. The efficiency goes to Pandemic Horde. I had a different battle report, actually. Pandemic Horde, Test, Brave, Northern Coalition, Pandemic, Legion. These are the groups that you've heard of. You've also heard of Legion of X Death, Unreal Alliance, Warped Intentions. So these are Pappy coming in and attacking the initiative and their allies. It should be the Stained Russians, actually. So Farada, Victrix, Good sacks. Against All Authorities, 5 of those guys. Good for. I like AAA. They're a huge name in EVE history. The Afterlife, also a Russian group. Midas 22. Well, actually, only one person from Midas 22. And one Goonswarm guy. What? There should be more. But the initiative put like 380 into fleet, which was really cool to see that. I estimated they could pull up on a regular basis 1 to 200, but they doubled that for this. So all hands on deck. And of the 380 guys they lost 590 ships, or 590 ships registered on kill mails. I'm not sure those are actual losses. But I did see that there was some attrition, so I think they reshipped when they were fighting. So 380 guys, specifically the initiative, I believe the other battle report had them at 680 ships. So some of them must have reshipped. And it could be that they didn't die, they just reshipped, because I did see a costume change from Munins to Ravens at one point. Let's look at some of the footage of that fight. By the way, the results of this fight were, as I said before, the Fortizar is now in danger. It has a final timer, probably within a day or two. So they lost the objective. The initiative lost the objective this time around. So their offensive campaign is in a little bit of peril here. Okay, so here is, of course, our friend Ron USMC doing great work every day, essentially broadcasting the war. Get this into a theater mode here. I'm going to leave the sound off because I have this at twice speed and he'll sound like a little anime character. So I think it's just showing you the battlefield here. You can see in red is the initiative. He belongs to test, of course, so he'll be in blue. I think this takes you right into looking at some fast-moving Munins, so we'll sweep in just a second. Beautiful camera work. He's using a 3D mouse. We actually tested this gear together a couple of years ago when the 64-bit client was going to come through. There you see the Munins. I think that fleet is commanded by Darkshines. You see that long trail? That's because the faster the ship, the longer the trail. These are heavy assault cruisers, and so they move really fast. And they pack a punch, and that's why they're a favorite of FCs that can maneuver them well. And you see them swirling around that ship in the middle there. That's not a Munin, that is a monitor. They're a little bit slower than hacks or heavy assault cruisers, or in this case, Munins. But you can see that they're all anchoring around him and following him through this battle scene here. So again, the initiative were in Munins, and also they brought out some Ravens too later on. Let's have a look at them bringing out the Ravens. It's the same stream a bit later. Here you can see the actual war fight is happening, and you can see they're trying to control range, right? The blue is Pappy forces. There's multiple fleets here, but you can see that they're keeping their distance and trying to use electronic warfare. That's a lot of the stuff that you're seeing flying back and forth. They're doing electronic warfare, whether it be dampeners or tracking disruptors or whatever they could do to affect their enemy's ability to apply damage. And you see on the left here, Pappy fleet getting closer. Again, there's many alliances on the field, so they have multiple FCs, all capable of being very effective. 5, 6, 7 FCs. So you'll see different maneuvers, different tasks being done by different fleets. This is part of, let me close this here. Part of the coalition warfare is a well-coordinated fleets are able to do some amazing things. but not very well coordinated fleets will get in each other's way. There'll be some infighting because objectives were not followed, etc., etc. It looks very much like the initiative was outnumbered. I think the raw numbers are probably 2 or 3 to 1, probably more like 2.5 to 1. 1,800 people in this fight, and there was probably about 600 to 700 were on the Imperium side. Massive explosions there are going to be from capital ships. They have larger mass and they blow up bigger. Here you're going to see a fax blow up in just a second. Light up the sky.
If you don't mind me interrupting for a sec, answering Wormus's question in chat about what the fight was over at. That's the Init's staging Fortizar in OSHT system that the Pappy forces came. It had already been shield already been reinforced, and they were going for the armor reinforcement at this time.
Thank you.
And they were successful at it. So Init, don't count them out though. They got punched in the nose this time, but that's some tough, good people. They're going to be around.
Right. So that is the footage that we have now. Again, you can watch this live with Ron USMC on Twitch. He is a CCP partner, as you can see on the top left. So are we, so we can leave that up there. But good fight today in the war zone. All right. And thanks for reminding me to look at chat for some questions. There are some, I'm not familiar with these, and instead of just reading them, I think I'll actually read them, figure out how straightforward they are, and then report on them. These are a couple of posts from Angry Mustache and from Asher Elias. I think describing what they probably have been going through in the last few days, some victories, some fights and stuff like that. So these are battle reports. Sorry, I need to read those before I can figure out how straightforward they are. This is the fight that we were just talking about in, oh shit, it went for, yeah, this is a little bit off from what my previous information was, but about 1,800 people in local, 100 billion ISK in damage. Most of that is the initiative's losses with 590 ships destroyed and over 76 billion destroyed. Pappy also had some losses though. They lost 445 ships for a total of 32 billion. There will be more fighting in the future. As we said before, this Fortizar, it's going to be interesting to see if initiative can hold on to it. Right. Let's do some weather real quick. I believe that Eve Scout, which does this weather reporting, thank you very much, has added some definitions for each storm. So those 4 boxes below, here, 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 and here, are describing what the effects of those storms are. So for those that need a refresher, the electronic is the cloaking disrupting storm. If you're in there, you can't cloak up. The exotic storm is, I believe it works on logistics, and you can see it has bonuses back and forth. So you want to read these, the gamma storm and the plasma storm. All of them do different effects. So some people actually chase the storms to have those advantages. If they're in the right ships, they'll actually have advantages. But the storm tracking says that you have an exotic storm in Oasa in UG or UGR, electrical storm in Delve, WTAC-K, a gamma storm in Vale of the Silent, HTAC-1, plasmas in Providence, 8B-TAC-V, electrical, again, there's always 2 types of storms in New Eden, so this is the second electrical, and it is encloudering in Z-TAC Y. That's where the eye of the storm is. There's also storm effects that radiate from that eye of the storm, and these things move around every day, every 1 to 2 days. The second exotic storm is in Fountain, LIW. Second gamma storm is in JWZ. And finally, the second plasma is in branch ITAC 7. Thanks to Captain Crinkle for scanning a few of those, but a special thanks to Katia Se, who does a lot of this work by herself, running down where these storms are and tracking them. All right, let's see, reading here. Whoa, thanks for the subs. That's very nice of you on a slow news day. I can see performance or news content not related to generosity, though, but I think that's for previous work probably. Thank you very much. Oh, I missed my opportunity to thank. There we go. I did see a comment pop up. By the way, Xylix, thank you very much. Always, you've been a good supporter a long time and really appreciate that. Not just of us, but I've seen that you supported other groups as well. So that's awesome. Really appreciate that. Everybody benefits from your generosity. Thanks again for the seconds. It's happening so fast I can't figure out what's happening. But thanks a lot. Okay, so Damon Revenge says a Pappy Titan got dread bombed during the fight in another system. That's awesome. I didn't hear about that. And all you guys need to thank Xylix there. He's showering generosity on you guys. Yeah, I'm not.
I think it's because you're covering the weather. He decided to be Rainmaker.
Yeah.
That what had mentioned was there was a Ragnarok loss in CB4 in Catch also. That might be what they're referring to.
Yeah. Okay, here it is. It's a Watchman rag. Thanks for the tip. Yeah, Watchmen. These guys are evacuating probably because they're shuffling around. So this guy probably got killed in transit. Let's have a look at his fit. He might have been fit for battle, but I don't know if he was actually used. It's possible, even as a bridging titan, that he was being used for wartime activities. But it's also possible that he was on his way out of the region. Oh, who caught that, by the way? Oh, Dread Bomb. Now, Dread Bomb's not really aligned in the war, so this isn't a war target destruction. They are third-partying officially. But remember, the guy that runs Dread Bomb is former Test. He did a ton of FCing for them, so it gets a little awkward when you change sides. You end up killing guys that used to depend on you. So anyway, good hunting, Dread Bomb. There we go. That's how you... All right. And that's it from the war front. I haven't... Caleb, you haven't actually been exchanging any money in the market, have you?
Recently? No.
We talked about this yesterday, so I'm
you're setting me up.
Yes, I'm bringing it out. Like, why aren't you in the market, since that's something that you used to do all the time?
Well, because I think I have declared Eve dead to me. The economy is not picking up. It's not developing into the solution that I had hoped for. And there's really nothing to do for someone like me. And I think that is the same with dedicated industrialists and, well, of course, market people and meta market people. The game is just not what it used to be. It's you can call it easier, and that's fine. I've learned to live with the fact that maybe the old game is never coming back.
Sad.
Well, CCP does not seem to have the balls to actually do what's required. which is weird because they had the balls to do things like Blackout. They had the balls to do some of the stuff that the ecosystem team is doing, which is basically strangling the chicken. I just don't see them doing the things that are needed. Whether it's because they don't realize where the pressure points are and where the important emergent gameplay is going to come from, or if it's just because they don't really want to do those things. I can't figure it out now. And I went on my university revision break and I decided to just lapse my accounts because there's really nothing to do. And the fact that I just went broke before all this shenanigan stuff went down about 2 years ago doesn't really help. So I was basically about to rebuild all my wealth, and that's really difficult when the game does not really cater to my playstyle anymore.
Can we do war bonds for Caleb to keep him involved? Like, you guys donate.
Can we do failed feudal lords for Caleb?
Well, we'll raise. We can have a yard sale. Nick, you were saying something?
Yeah, I posted that, folks can donate to the FCNB, my favorite fund, Feed and Clothe Nick Bison.
I like the acronym. Yeah, but the serious point that CCP isn't probably going back to 2009, right? That shouldn't be any surprise. The games were totally different back then.
Yeah, and you shouldn't roll the game back. What you should do, and again, there's a risk that we end up start talking about biology and ecosystems and real life resources and all that stuff. But the point is that back then the ecosystem and the garden was lush. Or at least it was alive. Right now we have a situation where everything seems stagnated, flat, depreciating, and then CCP keeps adding more and more stuff, right? They keep adding items to the market, and they have not done anything with something as fundamental as the amount of market orders or contracts that you can juggle as a marketeer. So that means that you have to scale horizontally with alt accounts, pretty much like people like New Eden Trade and similar. I don't know what you want to call them, but people that want to juggle 100 accounts because they want to be able to do a specific thing in the game. I don't think that's good gameplay. I think that's horrible gameplay. If you have to have that many alts spinning up, whether you have to run them as multiples at the same time or just run them consecutively to do a certain function, whether that's industry or market stuff, I think it's really horrible gameplay. I think it's exactly the wrong direction.
What is it?
I know that.
Yeah. What is it you don't like about that? Is it that one person can leverage himself into 100 people relatively easy and therefore breaking dependence on other people, therefore making everybody else unemployed because the one guy can just be self-sufficient? These are themes that you're talking about.
It's all of it, but it's mostly the fact that I'm being forced to sit there and fill out my launcher with several accounts and then sit there and juggle them and log in and log out and log in and log out and log in and log out. It's like, I didn't sign up for this kind of aspy work. It's like, this is cancerous. I don't want to play this kind of game.
Well, what's the alternative, though? Let me take you back to 2009 when stations in HiSec had limited slots and the waiting list for getting your research done was 30 days, 45 days, because people like you, I think you admitted this, would just stack it full of your own jobs and you'd put jobs on top of jobs. And so the waiting list basically got really long.
All that plugging and abusive stuff because it was a hard limit is, of course, bad, and we should not go back to anything like that. The problem, the point is, or the important aspect of this is the scalability, diminishing returns, and the fact that you cannot have a competition market if you do not have any form of scarcity or limitations. Okay, when you open a book on economy, some of the first things you will have to learn is how to do supply and demand curves, right? If supply is infinite, it has no value. It has absolutely zero value.
Right. Or it shrinks. It can meet all the demand and more, and so therefore, the price for it would go lower and lower and lower until
It goes
it's
to
nothing.
zero.
Yeah.
It literally goes to zero. If something is infinitely abundant, its value is zero, right?
Yeah.
And this is the point. And of course, the opposite is horrible. If you have something that is statically limited, right? So flatlined, where you can't change the supply, then you have the opposite situation. Then you have something that theoretically, if there's more and more people coming into the game, then the demand will rise, but there's no more supply, so it just keeps going up in price forever, and there's nothing to stop it.
Like Bitcoin, or
Yeah,
right?
Bitcoin.
It's only created at a certain pace, and therefore, as more people want it, the price goes up for it. Bitcoin's a bad example because it's kind of crazy, and I can't explain it, but I see what you're saying.
In the chat, Phil brings up a point that in the game for all intents and purposes we've had just about unlimited ice, but the value is never zero. It wasn't the point of it being zero. The value was lower, but the time.
I'm not going to get pulled into
yes, pull him in.
Well, this is dumb minutiae, right? Because then you have to start talking about why does an infinite faucet not end up in a price that's near zero? Well, it does, and we have seen that in some areas, or something which is definitely hinting at actual zero, where you're basically holding the price because no one wants to change it. It's not because the value is there; it's just because no one changes it. This is similar to what you see in many Tech 2 areas, where the price is flat and it should actually be dropping, but no one is willing to actually take it down a notch. There's many such things, right? The point is with ice that ice is mined and miners move away from ice because they will only mine it for their own personal needs or for their group's needs, because it's basically not a scarce resource, or at least it wasn't. But again, this is more about how things are used and the utility of things, and how fuel is basically a non-issue in the game. There's so many things from an ecosystem and economic point of view that's so wrong that it's almost tragic. We covered a little bit the other day when we were talking about how ADMs work, and it's just I don't even know where to start. I would just say one of the things that would really make things nice if they figured out how to put the limitations into the game instead of on things like the character sheet. Because if we are forced to
into the environment,
into the environment, because if we are forced to scale with more and more accounts, and it becomes a login game where I have to juggle more than 5 accounts just to have a playing experience, I think that's a mistake. I think that's a massive flaw. And this is not because I don't want to pay, because I would be perfectly fine if I could say, okay, every time I plex up, I get another account's worth of contracts and orders and industry slots and whatnot.
right.
But that just feels like pay to win. So effectively what we have now is a very bad variation of a pay to win mechanic that's hidden behind this obfuscation design, which is really bad.
I've been making that point a long time when people got on my case about gold ammo and +1 ammo and whatever. I was like, you're already doing pay to win. It's just laundered through some things. So if you buy one character, or if you pay for one character, whether you do it with the environment money that you get, or you actually use real money and subscriptions and stuff, you get a finite amount of ability to do things with the character. For instance, a hard limit on because of your character, a hard limit on how many orders you can put on the market. So to break that, you create a second character and a third.
And you can see even Hateless agrees with us, right? That something needs to be done to make the time valuable again. And you cannot make time valuable if the faucets are stupidly infinite and brute forceable. They will just everything you do becomes devalued. This is the whole discussion with automation and massive scaling, and well, basically this is almost Marxist economics, right? This is if you are not paying your workers, if your workers are not valuing their labor, then nothing gets pricey. Everything is just flat, and everything will stagnate, and the game becomes meaningless. Because one of the things that is, in my opinion, the unique selling point of EVE Online is that they figured out, well, you can't have permanent death in MMOs or in modern games, because that's just bad, right?
Yeah.
So how do you
People be
put
leaving all
in
the time.
how do you put in a similar type of consequence, a felt consequence of playing and losing? You can only do that by managing things like resources. It's the resources and the setbacks. It's equivalent to, some of you guys might remember way back when we had these things called save points in games, right? Can you
I think they're
imagine
still there.
if someone like halved the amount of save points in their game, or completely removed them so you couldn't save? So every time you got set back so much that you had to replay everything. And to be honest, back then we say that games were harder. Well, yes, they were, but they were also more fun. I still remember playing the end level, so the last leg of Tomb Raider 1, because it was this horrible, horrible thing with no save points, and you had to learn to do it perfectly. And I think it took like 15, 20 minutes to run through that thing. And it was like, just, you have to get this in your hands, in your fingers, in your muscle memory to be able to complete this game. And I think we passed the joypad around between the three of us, us friends, trying to complete this game. And it was like every time someone started dying a little bit too much, it was like the other two would be screaming, "Come on, pass it on! You're too stressed. You're not good enough. Let someone else try." It was just so much more fun, right? You sat there and you got passionate. This is what used to be in EVE Online. This the shakes, the stress, the screaming, the yelling, the setbacks, the going almost bankrupt. Like, that is what, as I have said before, losing is half of winning.
It releases the same chemicals in your brain. But
It's the motivator, right? It's
motivation.
what drives you to excel. You do not push yourself to excel because you keep winning. That's actually, often it's got the opposite effect, what I am inclined to call the Michael Jordan effect. Like, when you reach a certain point and no one's competing with you, what the fuck do? I'm going to take up something else. I'm going to do baseball or golfing and see if I can do something as in that sport, because no one's competing with me anymore.
Well,
and it's the same with Michael Schumacher in Formula One. It took a long while for someone to actually challenge the crown, right? And they started being lethargic and lazy.
Well, there's a book out there called The Attention Merchants by Tim Wu. I think he's a Princeton professor. He talks about essentially how media is always co-opted by advertising, and how it's grown from radio, actually from newspapers to radio to television to cable to internet and now to mobile. And he shows just how all those things started and how they were co-opted and kind of destroyed. And there were resistance movements about that. But when he gets to video games, he starts talking about this video game that was so hard that you would eventually die for sure. And they found that this video game ended up making more money than all the movies combined for that year, I believe. And it's in the 70s. And that video game was called Space Invaders. But because it was so difficult, people would put in another coin and then another coin and then another coin. And
then you start talking about the coin-op economy and how games were designed to be basically make you feed the machine again and again. That's not really a positive direction, but the point is, difficult games are really fun. And if you have you seen that?
Let me just get this out there, because this is the fact that I wanted to get to. It came out in 1982. It made $3.8 billion. That was more than Hollywood combined, I believe. So, yeah. Anyway, there you go. Okay, but we're talking about, because I think this relates. I think about the old saying in EVE Online where, and I may be going in a different direction here, but because you mine the ore, then building the object is free, or it feels free, because the only thing you spent was your time, but your time has no value, so it was free.
See, that's I think one of the misnomers is, I've been mining pretty much on and off my entire game career with Eve. My time is valuable, and I factor that into the things I build. So my price is a little higher. Well, they're quality workmanship anyway, but that aside, got to value the time.
And it's the standing joke in economy, right? The whole topic of opportunity cost and how human behavior work in economies. One of the things is that okay, we are at risk of going down a rabbit hole of something controversial, but the valuation of housework, right? Whether it's knitting or child rearing or childcare, home cooking, all these things, they've traditionally been valued to zero. When you suddenly start,
in other words, a wife doesn't get paid for her work.
Exactly. So the value of her work has been set to basically nothing, right? You don't value all that labor that goes into the household. Of course, when suddenly women have the opportunity, here's the key word, to get into the labor force and the labor market, now there's an opportunity cost, right? Because now that work will not be done if she has opted to actually go and work. So that means that
you got to hire a nanny and a house cleaner and
exactly,
servants.
and then you realize what the price is, right? Because what you thought was free is actually not free. So it's just if I mine it, it's free. It's very similar. It's everything you in-house and do yourself feels free, but it's actually wrong. And this is where CCP needs to consider all these real life economic factors and realities in their game design. There was so much more of it back in the day because there was very strong incentives to start outsourcing some of these things, or to at least recruit some specialists to actually do them, because you couldn't really manage it yourself. And then you get into the whole discussion of the PvP centric and how when the big organizations, or some of them at least, goons, started actually inviting in or recruiting more industrialists and more miners to actually get the crabbing work done, everyone else was forced to do the same. And then it feels like there was this, I'd call it collusion, or almost collusion, in the CSM to then get CCP to make it easier, to flatten it, to lower that barrier. and I'm surprised.
So more people could participate in it.
Yeah. And I'm just surprised that someone like the Imperium or Goons didn't push back on that, because they had an edge. Of course, they had to compete with some very crazy specialist, non-affiliated types that did industry and mining on scale and had all their niche productions and all that stuff. But the fact that we flattened the game the way we did and made this whole already replaced economy, it basically made the game boring, and it made it, I think, unplayable for anyone that isn't playing checkers.
We call it. Oh, go ahead, Nick.
No, what Caleb was saying, I may just be echoing his thoughts on part of it. In making the resources more available out in Null, initially, I kind of looked at that and went, "Hey, it's not a bad idea," because the means of harvesting hadn't gone up until the work changes and skill injectors. So now you can not only do it really efficiently, but you can do it now on your second week in the game. And because the training time was gone, the learning curve of the steps to get there to be an efficient resource gatherer were gone.
And this is where it was a perfect storm, right? I wrote about this,
Yeah.
that they basically brought in some things that in isolation they looked fine, but when you combine them, you have a perfect storm, and it basically destroyed and bombed the entire game.
Well,
Because when you get something like infinite brute forceable faucets, like infinite spawning anomalies, and you get a Rorqual, and you get SP injection and
that's the
SP farming.
catalyst. The
Well,
ASP
yeah,
is the
that's the
catalyst.
catalyst. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's where do you
It
have
is.
where
It
do
is the
you
match that struck this powder keg of ingredients without
yeah,
bottlenecks.
yeah, because it's really about bottlenecks. And don't get me wrong, I love CCP Rise, but him introducing SP farming the way that they did, it's just so destructive. It's not that I support the elitism and the almost aristocratic attitude of, well, if you haven't been here since 2003, you shouldn't be entitled to a Rorqual. That's not really what I think, but I do believe we needed some sort of catch up mechanic. But the
Yeah.
openness that they gave us completely broke the game, because it basically gave us what you hear people talking about now. That is, I get a little bit of sick in my mouth. It sounds like respecking. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm just going to respec from Rockwell into into a fax. It's
Yeah.
like, respecking in my EVE Online. Could you please take this out now?
That's, I think, exactly what it was used for. It had multiple purpose. One is how do you get people interested in a game where the game's not completely won by the old players? Well, you make some kind of leveling fast mechanic. And on the other hand, I think it gave a lot of people, because it was some you gave a lot of people the ability to respec in order to take skill points they weren't really using anymore and move them somewhere else, so they could participate in a different thing. So they could kind of move around with their interests. They could move their skill points around with their interest with, and this is what I was going to say, a little bit of a SP sync, so that you're draining SP from the game in general. So the more somebody's respecking, the more they're kind of being leveled off with the newer guys that are coming up. I think that was the idea. That's why it's so steep way up there when you have a lot of SP to use these things. They're not really useful.
It's just, don't get me wrong. There's many things like Ludo mechanically, so game mechanics and game design wise, that I like in other games, but there's just many of these things that have crept into this game, and I think it's been mismanaged. And when you talk about something like skill point stuff and respecing, I think that's definitely one that needs a massive overhaul. There must be a better solution to this. It's just, how do you do that as a game designer when you've already introduced it to the game and you see that it's actually breaking it? I don't like that job. I would not want that job, because that's going to be difficult, and it's going to create an outcry. But
I think they
I'm just saying,
experimented with accelerators instead. But
yeah, and there must be some sort of, call it a middle ground, where we get the best of both worlds, where we get some of the catch-up mechanics, some of the respec stuff, but it needs to come with a massive downside. You can't just, and of course, some will say, well, it already does. Yeah, but it's being abused, and it's being used in a way where it destroys speciality. This is why my argument is that currently the skill tree is being treated like multi-classes in pen and paper games. And once you've leveled up to a certain point, multi-classing is massively superior, because you can basically have two guys represent an entire adventuring party, right? Because they have all the things needed. It's a cleric slash mage slash fighter slash barbarian slash. It's like, come on, this is not funny. This is not how
you don't like
play this game.
multi-classes? Oh,
I like the idea, but if you remember, it actually had massive downsides when you were playing it practically.
well, you were
So
limited. You couldn't get.
you were really limited, and again, you were basically you were nerfing yourself when it came to catch up. You usually had this thing that you could start a brand new character and play with your friends, and you would catch up to them if you were a pure class, because the scalability of levels were designed so that when you went from level 8 to level 9, I would basically go from level 1 to level 8, right? But if you then did multi-classing, then you basically split out all that experience, and then you would be fairly lowish in level, comparatively, because you
Well,
had to split the XP out on all of those
Yeah.
classes. But you don't have the same thing really in Eve, right? Because you can pay yourself to do it, and if I can go and find a dragon's horde and then just skill up on gold instead of experience points, it's like, Jesus Christ! If you
Right.
you have no idea how broken your game is now.
Well, there was a lot of ingredients that had to come together. It wasn't just that, and everything had counterplay. It was just that they started circling each other and it became the serpent that ate its own tail. And that was the problem. But if you think about it, a Rorqual cost a lot of money. If you wanted to put that out there and risk it, it's your loss when it gets blown up. You want to put 2 out, it's your loss. You lose twice as much. But
Just
then
remember when you go back in 2003, the novelty of the fact that it was live training, that you didn't have anything that you could grind your face at. That was such a big point for many of the people that chose to play this game, because you would not have this, what I call, no life of face rolling that was just racing to the end, right? Because that didn't work. It was out of the question. It was taken off the table. The same with the fact that even back then, well, you were never locked into a specific class. You had to choose. You had to choose your path while you played, right? And the scalability of the skills were so that you could get a taste of something without starting and dedicating yourself too much into the specialization. So it was very much agency with us as players, and there was no need for things like catch-up mechanics, because they were built into the actual scaling of the skills. So the game used to work back then, but I think that CCP has broken it, and the player base is a vital part of that, because they take advantage of it and they start seeing this as normal, and they don't appreciate how good the design was at day one.
with some, go ahead.
Upstart in chat asks a question. He says, and I just wanted to address it because I get where he's coming from on it. He says, I fail to see what is wrong with ketchup. It makes money for CCP and it gets people into the game. I take exception to part of that. Is he correct in that? Yeah, it definitely throws money. Does it get people into the game? Potentially, but it's that immediate gratification without spending the time to earn it. When you spend the time to earn it and train it and practice it, it means so much more to literally anybody. I mean, obviously not a universal truth there, but it does.
It is. If I take you back to pen and paper, if I just put you in at the same level as everyone else, and you end up doing this every single time, and you never experienced play from low level and all the way to mid and high level, you do not experience the game. You're not playing the game. You're jumping in and playing another game with people that have already experienced the real game, and you can't be expected to react and play with them as well when you haven't experienced the real game.
Well, this is I'll just say it says here in chat, and this is something we hear a lot too. Being in a ship doesn't mean you know how to fly it. It does take a bit of learning how. What do you say to that?
The game is just, the game is not that Twitch based, so that argument is really not true.
It's turn based, but really quick.
Yeah, well,
I think on that point, when you talk to when I'm focusing on resource gathering folk, when you can inject into a Rourke in no time, and then in no time figuratively, and then be able to sit out in a mining anomaly with a half a dozen other people that maybe have been doing this for a while. They tell you what to do. You're pretty safe because you're just being told what to do. You didn't learn the process of how it took to get there and then what it takes to actually fly it properly.
Why is that important? I mean, a carpenter will show an apprentice carpenter how something is done. And
yeah, but
it's not like he's cheating.
Let's just get to the elephant in the room first. The problem is not that big in when it comes to PvP. The problem is with PvE, and with PvE there is no such thing as you can't fly the ship, because you can basically read up on everything. As long as it's PvE, there's a recipe on how to do things. So yes, you can go straight from new player to the highest PvE level instantly, and that is the major problem. It's not so much that, because if you buy a ship to PvP, it is pay to lose, true. But if you buy a ship to PvE, it's pay to win. That's just a fact. Sorry.
Yeah, it's true, because the recipes are created. I think this is what Nick was saying, is the recipes created on how to make money with, say, a Vexor Navy issue and drones that automatically attack your targets. Somebody can basically walk you through a money printing machine. And if you can do it and get confident with it, I think within a few weeks, you're able to do it with 2 accounts at the same time, possibly 3, etc. So you can walk into situations where you do very well. With PvP, there's too many variables in that you're fighting another human who does things irrationally or different, or knows more than you, or knows less than you, but just does the wrong thing, the unexpected thing. So it's not as easy to game that sort of thing.
And again, when it comes to PvP, that's positive for the game regardless. When it's PvE, it's bad for the game regardless, because you are increasing the faucet without having a proportional sink to match it. When it's PvP, it's always sinks, always. So I don't mind that. People can pay into PvP as much as they like. It's just going to create more destruction, and I like that. I want more of that because we really desperately need it.
Well, yeah, I mean, we talked about a great number of subjects on this. This is something that we return to all the time. And I think that the problems are very complex, but there is one overriding theme, Caleb, I think you'll agree with me, that I think 2011 was a change where people started really wanting the PvP game fixed, the ship combat game fixed. And you heard a lot of complaints with people like Matani and others, because Matani was part of CSM at the time, and you still hear echoes of this. It's like, hey, don't waste any time on making clothes. Don't waste any time on this other stuff. Put all your time into balancing this game over and over and over again, because you need to like keep it fresh for us, because we're PvPing. And then you need to remove roadblocks for us, like time traveling, so that we can get right to the action, right? That's why we made RVB, red versus blue, so we get right into the action and then go about our merry way. We don't want to sit around and wait for a fight to happen, etc., etc., etc. Or even just gate camping not working anymore because the ship can actually get right through a gate camp. So there's constantly a struggle, constantly a way to PvP. These kinds of like arcade game designs are built to make this game more exciting, make it funner, get you in the fun faster, and become less dependent on other people so that you can come into the game and play it and then take off. What do you think about that as a direction for design, as opposed to the simulation or the pen and paper, the D&D, the classification, the decisions you make, the decisions you're stuck with, that kind of stuff?
Well, I think when you're talking one-on-one or small-scale skirmishes, I do not think that. I think the skill level of the pilots starts playing so much a part of the gameplay that what you do that in is not that important. At least not until CCP started adding 400% and 600% bonuses and modifiers on the hulls, but that's a long discussion on how they completely destroyed the game design on the ships. The point is that whether you have best in slot or not, when you're playing in small groups or solo, I think that's not really that important. That becomes important when you have fleets of massive size, and that is why that whole doctrine gameplay becomes the strategic game, right? So the small game is supposed to be like jousting, but the big level play is supposed to be like massive strategic chess. But if pieces can move easily and without any cost, from one end of the galaxy to the other, which is the force projection stuff, well, then you won't get the positioning of troops strategically like a chess game, right?
Mhm.
They will just be in one location, and it's just when you take them out. So then it becomes like a bit like a card game, right? It's basically just like racing card games, where you're just picking out the ships that you need to counter what's being put in front of you, and there's no other reaction than what you bring to the blob, and that whole blob mechanic stuff is, I believe, what has flattened the game. We should have gone in the opposite direction,
Right.
and made it more strategic, more like chess, more like scouting. So I need to know how many of what type of ship is in that system or in that constellation, and how realistic is it that they can actually manage to move that to another strategic position. I think that's the kind of gameplay we should have had in Eve, because the game has the size with, what is it, 9,000 solar systems, massive connectors,
Yeah, and they say they're all
and
empty all the
complexity.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's because assets should be spread out a lot more, and that would mean that we would need to know who lives next door, what they have, what weaponry, what wealth, what skill set of players, all that stuff. The game would become strategic and interesting again. Right now, it's really just blob fests, and I think it's dumb.
Well, I think if you think about it, there's a lot of things that affected what you're talking about, and that is the speed of the game, the accessibility to content. We'll call it content because that's what PvPers say all the time. It's like, this is content. We want content. Of course, they're talking about spaceships shooting each other because that's the only content in Eve, which is a ridiculous understatement, overstatement, actually. But one of the things is just not having to, there's some certainties that go with combat. You know, if you can scan down a wormhole, you can find ways across the galaxy. And so now time and space is a little less meaningful. Decisions about where you position yourself, what territory you're in, a little less meaningful. Look at the guys that moved into Thera. They moved there because they had access to everything. Kind of an interesting choice. Pakven is happening. The same thing's happening there. It gives you access to everything. It cuts down your time. But can you imagine if there were some variability on that? Let's say you move a fleet of 100 ships through a wormhole. They're small enough to go through. The mass doesn't collapse on them. Maybe you lose a few. Maybe instruments on your ship don't work anymore. But there is some variability, some damage that you take for all that travel that you're circumventing. I like the idea of more variables that keep you from being 100%. We don't see an army that accidentally walked through a swamp have a bad day and actually lose when they should have won. Like we don't get a lot of those kinds of interesting twists, and therefore FCs really have to just train a certain amount of things rather than saying, well, we've got to pad it because these things can happen. You know, like there's no traffic in EVE Online, which kind of drives me crazy. You can't be late in EVE Online. You're going to go somewhere, it's always going to take 10 minutes. But life doesn't work that way.
Well, this is back to the whole troop movement and assets movement. I think CCP should consider flipping it on its head a little bit. Instead of making it easy to move stuff, they should make it easier to move people. I don't mind if someone can easily muster 100 men in a system, because then you have a situation of, well, what are they manning? They need to man some gear. And if that's semi-locked down because it's not easy to move around, then it becomes a strategic assets positioning game, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it's really about, sometimes you might end up having too many people for too little equipment. So then you need to spread out your labor force, right, to other strategic locations. Or you have the situation where you have abundance of assets in a certain situation, and you have enough to reship many times, and then you get that almost chain gun like effect where, well, like you
Gatling
saw
gun.
with the with the keep stars and stuff, with the
Oh,
initiative just throwing themselves and dying endlessly.
reship,
But
reship. Yeah.
yeah, and that's interesting, because if you knew or had some way of gathering the intel of what is at the staging system that they're staging from, then all these things would become strategic. And then, can you do something to blow it up? Well, it's just, there's so much potential in this game, and I feel like CCP has been moving it down the wrong direction compared to adding complexity. This should be the most mind-blowing game around, but they've
more
gone the
complexity.
exact opposite way.
More complexity, harder. In fact, I want to see nations. I want to see baseliners go on strike. So a guy in his battleship can't actually undock because he doesn't have enough people. They're on strike. So just variability that affects the game in strange ways, because it's just become too straightforward. Sorry.
Let's just take the example from the gameplay that I come from and represent, right? When the ecosystem and the economy had kind of matured in about 9 to 11, it was so complex and interesting that real life academics studied EVE Online, right?
And published.
One of the world famous economists actually did part of his postdoc studies on EVE Online, Yanis Varoufakis, right? But now they've all disappeared, and the reason they've all disappeared, or the majority of it has disappeared, is because the game doesn't work anymore when it comes to its ecosystem. That's how broken it is. Academics won't even look at it anymore. It's just it doesn't work. So why would you want to waste your time when there's nothing to look at? And it's the same with everything. Ties back to, well, human behavior, right? And agency. And this is where you get the emergency of not emergency, but emergency. So economies emerge from that. Ecosystems emerge from that, but it needs to have the right set pieces in the game. Then everything else builds. That is when it becomes interesting for outsiders, for academics, for Financial Times, for BBC. But the way it is right now, nothing is newsworthy. The game right now is exactly at the state where that I claimed the PVE stuff was when I was talking to Ashtarothi, right? But I still stick to the fact that right now, this game is not interesting for people outside of the game.
The stories that people hear about are getting smaller, I would say. You used to hear about banking, interesting financial scams. People saying they would buy certain huge equipment that was out of reach for most people. Therefore, a huge investment was necessary, and then taking the money and running. But now you hear about it's either a big fight or and the passions of the bigger players kind of going at it with their troops, or a human story about somebody who is memorialized or is in great need. Those are the kinds of stories coming out of EVE. There is still the science part of it, like the COVID Project Discovery that went out. That got a lot of press. I think some of the sci-fi lore from Pochven got some press. I think it did very well in a certain sector, but not necessarily in where we normally see it.
Well, EVE Online and CCP is a bit in the same situation as Xerox, Rank Xerox was before Apple ate them, right? There's no one competing with CCP in this field. There's no one that really can, but they are neglecting their own USP to the point where it's about to die. I'm not going to say, "Oh, Eve is dying,"
but they're
because
not. They're doing scarcity. That's something you.
But it's just, again, it's too little, and I feel like it's too late. If they don't go way more dedicated and surgically at this problem to make this game what it's supposed to be and the original USP, and of course we can discuss balance and whose gameplay we stomp on and in what order. That's fine. I agree. I know that you can't You
Well,
can't do this in a way that is strangling everyone's gameplay. You have to do it gradually, and you have to do it gradually where the effect is actually caused by the players themselves, and that they feel that they have the agency, and they realize that they've done it themselves, because then it's not CCP's fault. They've given us the tools to make the game that we want, and then we can start fighting each other. This is the type of direction I think CCP should have gone, but I just don't see them doing that. I know that they've put in this ecosystem team and they have some ideas, but they're not rolling things out in the right order, and they're not rolling out the things that will have the biggest impact. So I don't think it's solving the problem. It's pushing it's pushing the buck down the street. It's like kicking the can. It's like not really doing it.
Well, I mean, it's a process. It takes some time. They are making things scarce. You assume that value is going to go back up. People are sitting on stockpiles, waiting it out, except the warring parties, which are having to use their stockpiles in order to get the equipment they need in order to fight.
Yeah, but the whole stockpile discussion is just dumb when we haven't had the announcement of changes to industry. Because if you want to cut into stockpile, you have to put in some changes on things like
a wealth tax, right? Like the more you have.
No.
How about storage fees for all that stuff?
No, you have to boost the requirements of certain builds, and the.
But then you insulate. Then you insulate the people who already have that stuff.
It doesn't matter. You can look at the universal numbers of items and then fix it like that. It's just, I would much rather that they do something with things like slot limitations, with things like dynamic taxation, with flipping the ADMs to actually reflect what they're supposed to reflect. There's many things where I think there is a lot more to gain than to try and hammer a screw. It's like, that's just not going to work.
Well, one of the things earlier, I can't remember which CCP we were talking with, but it mentioned one of the things is that the best answer was always to store extra stuff. It was never, because there was no limitation on how much you could put in a station. There still isn't. You get a little medium structure, an Astra house, doesn't matter how much you store in there, as long as it's allowed to dock. So the answer has always been to hoard, and there's no fee for it. There's no downside to it whatsoever. That's one of the things that, in hindsight, I'm sure they would look at and go, "Yeah, your hangar should be a limit of size. You should have some limitations."
Well, I don't necessarily agree. I think the fact that you have almost or practically infinite storage is one of the unique aspects of this game.
It's just scattered.
It's maybe the only one that I know that has this feature. There are things where I think there should be some sort of upkeep cost, maybe some ISK sink, maybe a fuel sink. I do think that there should be a limitation on how many supers and titans you can necessarily dock in specific types of structures. Sure, there are things where I agree with you, but I think doing a hard limit on storage space in EVE would be completely undermining the game design, because I think almost the infinite storage is almost like a requirement for the complexity that this game should have.
All right. Well, look at the idea of, maybe not limit total storage, but force it into station containers that rent space, that at least take something out of the economy.
Yeah, I would remove hangar floor as a phenomenon in the game and make everything a container that is plugged in either in a ship or in a station. So when you have your hangar, there's no such thing as a hangar floor, or rather the only thing that can go on a hangar floor is a container. And then the containers would levy some sort of cost either in fuel or in ISK cost, depending on whether it's NPCs or players. That's a direction towards what you're talking about, because then you end up having this situation where the upkeep that you're paying for storage is supposed to be so small that it doesn't matter. You're supposed to balance this. But if you start just having way too much and you're not yielding or generating enough value on those passive assets, you're going to start actually bleeding wealth, and you're going to have to scale down. Something like that could be useful. I would just go very easy on something like that because it has the risk of breaking the game.
I like the idea of paying for weight, not necessarily value or whatever.
I think that again, that's one of those
Industry
things
would
that
become expensive.
it's one of those things that need to be discussed on how that is best done, because this is something like, what does docking fee cost and what does jump gates or warp gates actually cost in usage? There's of course fuel when we're talking again players and player empires, but in high sec you need something similar. You need to have these docking fees and jump costs or jump taxes, right? So this is about what's the volume and the weight of your ship, and what is the value or the weight of the assets that you dock with. So there's so many things that can be done, and just before people start saying, "Oh, now you're just making this game crazy complicated." Well, all of these things were actually planned in 2003. They were in the game as a feature that was supposed to be turned on.
Interesting. Okay. Well, all right. So we've explored some ideas for fun, and this goes on all the time in talking in stations when we don't have the recorder on, unfortunately. So all that gets lost. It's kind of sad.
It's also something like this would move us down towards a past thing that I know you like. Things like specific tools for specific types of items, depending on where you are. So you effectively bring back something like smuggling, right?
Yeah.
So smuggling should be done in a way that makes sense. So you know that something is not necessarily illegal, but because it's not legality, because that brings on a whole level of problems, right? What it should be is you're trying to avoid toll, right? You're trying to avoid taxation. This should be something that most Americans realize and understand, because I'm pretty sure your nation was started like this.
Built on freeways,
Well,
not toll roads.
The whole thing started with something with the taxation on tea, right?
Yeah.
So,
Well,
so
that's what they said.
tax avoidance is a massive thing, and this is where smuggling comes in. It's
Yeah.
not about whether or not something is legal; it's about whether or not something gets taxed.
Yeah. And Guide there says drug smuggling was an art form back in the day in EVE Online, and it was, and it had a whole role play aspect to it too. You didn't go to the market to buy your boosters. You actually knew a guy, and he knew a guy, and you would say, "This is what I need." And I need it at this station over here. And so that guy would actually, go to their gas, harvest all that, make the boosters, and then they would smuggle it over to your area because you couldn't go through high sec. So you'd have to go through low sec and do, there were smuggling routes and stuff. And they would bring it and deliver it. And that was their gameplay. Their whole gameplay was like, I'm a drug dealer in this sci-fi game.
And you could start small, right? You could just start small by saying, okay, we're gonna test this out a little bit. We're gonna see what happens if we add somewhere between 1% to 5% toll on things based on where they actually originates empire-wise, right? So if it's Galente stuff, they will have low
tariffs.
toll. Yeah, low toll or no tariffs on their own stuff, so drones and their own hulls and all that stuff. But everything else comes with some sort of import export tariff, right? This could be done fairly simply by classifying things based on their state or empire of origin. And then, of course, pirate and faction stuff should be slightly outlawed, maybe not downright outlawed, but levied with a massive tax or requirement of standing and things like that. There's many things that CCP could do. It's just they keep adding new blingy ships and skins, and sure, that's fine. It just doesn't make the game better.
Well, it does for people who like decorating their ships, but that's not everybody. But there are definitely people who like that sort of thing. They're collectors. I think it's a portion. I don't think it's the majority. Yeah, I would like to see governments have, they're having a faction war, for God's sake. So they should. I would like to see, what do they call those? Stop search or whatever they are from Concord. If you go, or from the militias from each side. So if you go into Galente space in the craft from a Caldari or using Caldari stuff, that there might be a chance that you actually get stopped, pulled over, and harassed by the locals that are Galente that don't like that equipment because the empires are at war. And I would love to see strikes, labor strikes from the baseliners.
And if I could do one thing tomorrow to the game to change it, that would be controversial. It would be I would make all Concord ships do logi instead of destruction.
In other words, they just repair people to save them rather than just being punitive after the fact.
Yeah,
destruction.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Right. So in other words, you de-incentivize ganking because you can't be ganked anymore.
Yeah, but I still think it should be possible. But then I would base it on the speed of escalation of Concord based on where in space and who it is that they're defending.
So you can overcome Concord if you are strategic enough and can gank hard enough, basically.
Yeah, of course. Because I still think we need ganking. It's just that ganking right now is a stupid initiative game where everything is like it's like assassination, right? There's no reaction. You don't know what's happening before you're dead.
Yeah, and unless you're bumped, and then it's coming for you. But the what would be really cool is if your standings affected the speed that Concord helps you out, or at least the empire that you're in. If you had standings with different empires, you get help quicker in that empire, maybe.
Yeah, and alert level, right? So things like the system's standing, TrueSec, your standing, the denizens' average standing, stuff like that. You could come up with very good algorithms to measure this, and this would be a modifier that just tells you how fast and how strong Concord reacts. And because I'm only against certain types of ganking and certain locations of ganking, I think it makes no sense that you can basically mug someone at broad daylight in downtown Manhattan,
and then get a sandwich at the store, because they don't do anything to you.
Well, I had kind of a wild thought on the whole Concord response time, and just spitballing here off the top of my head. Right now, it's based off of the security status of the system that the gank is happening in. With the slowest response time being in 0.5 systems, whereas roughly 18 seconds. Add a time to that with a second factor to it is the person being ganks Concord standing. I got good Concord standing. They better come to me fast.
Well, just some majesty. What if you could only wear certain clothing if you had high enough standing? Or there are more role play elements that could be put in the game, because right now, RP is you got to make it up yourself. They're even taking stuff away from RPers now. You don't even have a bloodline anymore. At least that seems to be going away. But if you had majesty for standings, then you have a whole nother set of gameplay and grooming that you could do. Right now, it's just spaceships and colors in space, and you can zoom in and out and maybe photograph yourself. I don't know. But there is no building over time or grooming a character into a designated personality.
Just to address something very important that was in chat, right? People are talking about that the CCP needs to make the game something that people want to come and play, new blood and new money and more money. And I'm just going to go back and argue that as long as they have what I call the cannibalized model, the fact that they are catering to veterans scaling with multiple accounts, they can never have a game that a new player would want to stay in. The value of a new player is too low compared to the cost of spinning up an alt. As long as this is the case, this game is horrible for new blood, and they will not stay, and they will not have growth in EVE Online until we remove that whole brute force benefit of multiple accounts and multiple multi-boxing and all that, until we remove that or nerf that almost to the ground, you cannot get new players and you cannot get growth back in the game.
Because you're not needed as a new player.
Exactly. There's no need for you. You do not add any value that a multi-account doesn't add much better and safer for the player base. So until we fix this problem, this game will never go back into growth.
I wonder if it should be a single player game, or you have one account, but what you should be able to do is have baseliners, and you could skill them up as alts. So they're inferior in some way. So another actual account is better. And then you find, there's plenty of games that limit you to one character.
Well, the point is that it should just be better for an existing veteran to recruit a new player instead of rolling up an alt, right? That's the only thing. It's not that I'm saying that we should cater to new players, but we should figure out a way to disincentivize people just using multi-boxing, multi-accounts, zombie farming, and all of these things. There should be a way to balance it so a new player is almost always preferable.
So Grey Wolf says, just ask Star Wars Galaxies how catering to newbies worked out for them. And so what he's referring to is they tried to make the game. Actually, it's very funny you say that, because I played Star Wars Galaxies for a while when it came out until pretty much the end before I came to Eve. And what they were trying to do, there was kind of an old game baked in, and people had figured out how to do it, right? There was all kinds of botting in that game, by the way. I know, because I did it myself. People showed me how to do it, even with variables, so you could skip the whatever law there was. And while you were doing that, you got up to level 80 or whatever it was, 40. And then there was a certain game you had to, kill the mind, not necessarily the body or the health or whatever, the stamina. And the point is that game was sewn up, but it was very fun. It was very PvP, but that was only 2 or 3 years or 4 years where it was really fun. And then Sony, I think I heard that Lucas looked at it and said, this is really boring. Where's all the excitement? Where's the laser guns? All that kind of stuff. And so they redid the game with first they did a new player.
Can I just answer a question?
Let me just finish this. They try to make it fun and exciting, but they changed the entire game engine. So it was a completely different game, and people were like, what the heck is this? Okay, go ahead.
Oh, it's just someone said, well, CCP doesn't care whether it's an alt account or a new player.
They do.
Maybe not. Well,
they do.
Maybe not so much, but of course they should, because one guy with 10 accounts does not have the same incentive for added purchases as 10 real players. So when it comes to every other expenditure of real money in their stores and with their services, real players are always massively superior to multiple accounts. You could basically say that the multi-accounting and the cannibalizing is, of course, insulating CCP from losing revenue streams. This is a fact, but or stabilizing it a little bit, but it doesn't bring new money into the stores and into their pockets. This is the problem. And until CCP starts thinking a lot harder on how to do this and how to monetize in meaningful ways, and historically they are maybe one of the worst companies in the world to actually make money and make new money. We've discussed this many times. No, they're doing okay because they have a fairly decent product and they have a monopoly on it. There's nothing even remotely like it out there. But compared to what they have, they're really bad at making money on it, because they keep making things that do not make massive profit and don't make continuous profit. This is back to the discussion on the whole Carneros debacle, right?
Not his debacle.
If you don't understand how microtransactions work, you will not be able to make money on this, right? I had this discussion recently with someone when we were talking about how some of the academic tools are stupidly expensive, but they have students going in and out the door every single semester, right? There's a new batch of students coming in all the time. Why are you overpricing this? Why are you pricing this on institution level prices and on established professor salaries. You should base all of your products on students, because that's where your money is, and that income stream replenishes itself. The fact that you're basically saturating your own market and then you go bankrupt, it's because you have a bad business model. And it's very similar with EVE Online. We need to get them to focus on things that people will buy all the time and want to throw money at CCP all the time, not these one-up things or floating nixes and stuff like that. It's just dumb. Vanity stuff is to get brand value. It's not to get profit.
Well, going back to what he said, CCP does care about new players. They don't just want money, because money can come and go, right? They make a change, all of a sudden you lose 9 accounts. Now, that's terrible. That's terrible for them. They don't want alts that you have to scale into a certain industry for the reason I just mentioned. Would they rather have 9 different personalities, 9 different potential socialization opportunities with whatever exponential amount of people they talk to? Because an environment that is alive with real people feels living, and it becomes a lot more enjoyable to be a part of that sort of thing. Remember, video games, especially MMOs, are actually social media. You may not think about it, but it works the same way as Facebook does, right? You put your best face forward. On Facebook, people are showing pictures of cats and their new hairstyle and how great their nails look, or whatever else. Or kids, look at my family, aren't they beautiful? And everybody says, yes, they're so beautiful. And EVE Online, it's like, look at my ship, look at my mothership, look at this Rorqual I built. It's the same thing. You're still showing your peacock feathers. So they want people in the game. Alts come and go with one decision where somebody's mad and that sort of stuff. And yes, my hair looks great today. Thank you very much, Dan Cook. Appreciate it.
But this is
I win.
It's difficult to start up this new and I would say profitable direction, because you have to start it slow. You can't just come in and just smack it on people's head. But when you're talking about something like EVE Online, at least the way that I used to think about it, it's massively social, it's massively complex, it's got all these different specialities and attitudes, and it's got tons of tribalism, and it's got this potential of being the best RP and lore environment on the bloody planet, right? But CCP has not been very good at banking on that, but they could get back into that. They just need to have someone, like Conero, someone that can actually figure out how do you monetize and market to the really tech savvy, call it the gray pound, because we are not 13-year-olds. We are 30 and 40-year-olds. We are even empty nesters who's got kids that's gone away. So we even have more money that we can spend. Right. But you need to give us something to spend it on. This is back to my argument that I make quite frequently about, piracy went away when Netflix came and gave a service that made the fucking piracy go away, because you got a product that was priced right, you got enough value for money, and you got stable service. Everyone wanted to pay for that because it's so much better than trying to obfuscate the rules, right? So it's the same with products for CCP. They need to come up with ways to monetize that feels like I am getting value for money. I'm getting something that I want, whether we're talking about an alliance skin or clothing for my avatar, but that of course requires me to have somewhere to go and flaunt my avatar. So then we're back to walking in stations. There's so many things where their money makers are in a direction that some people in the game right now might scream about and say, oh, you're wasting money. But it's not about them. It's about new clients, new customers, more income streams, because CCP will not start making money by trying to do what other games do, where they try to cheat, because you can't cheat EVE players the same way. Yeah. They're too old. They've been in the game for too long. If you try to do money grab or bait and switch and stuff like that, they're just going to leave the game.
Well, look, if you're going to innovate in an MMO, right, which is an old platform to begin with, this is the game to do it in, because this is all about futurism. The people who are into futurism, who are into science fiction, space travel, engineering, astroengineering, all that stuff, they're here in EVE Online. And so this is definitely the place you want to innovate social and communicative technology. So they could definitely take some chances there. But we got to go since we're out of time. I do want to thank Tiger there for putting in our Patreon. Again, if you guys like Talking in Stations and you want to support it like Nick here does, really would appreciate patronage. And if you can't do that, find another way to help out Talking in Stations with some upvotes or some thumbs up or subscriptions to, not subscriptions, but reminders of when the show's on and that sort of stuff. Because all of that adds up to our reward system going off. If we feel like we're failing, we're not going to continue to do it. If we feel like we're not progressing, we're not going to continue to do it. Like everybody in this audience and everybody who will watch this video knows that EVE Online is built on progression, and Talking in Stations is built by players like myself that need progression. So we want to see growth, we want to see improvement, and we want to see good metrics, and we want to see thumbs up, and we want to hear we're doing a good job every once in a while. That's really kind of all we get. Thank you though for coming and listening to us talk. We're always here at Talking in Stations Discord, so come hang out with us. We'll probably continue this conversation after this. For now, we're going to end the show. We will see you tomorrow. It's going to be Thursday. Hopefully there's more news tomorrow. Again, today, very short news day, not a lot going on, but thanks very much. Yes, upvote cats, especially when Hateless is on. All right, guys, we'll see you tomorrow. Take care.